Captain Alex O'Connell stood at the edge of the barren Xylok 9 desert, staring out at the horizon where the first whispers of the sandstorm began to rise. The wind stirred the endless dunes, a vast expanse of shifting sands that stretched as far as the eye could see. This planet, this test, had killed hundreds before him. Yet, Alex had no intention of becoming another corpse in the Syndicate's grim catalog of failure. He was determined to prove one simple thing: humanity wasn't weak. The sun blazed overhead, an unrelenting fireball in the sky. It cast long, sharp shadows across the cracked ground. Sweat trickled down Alex's brow, mixing with the grime of preparation. He adjusted his gloves and gripped the hilt of his weapon, a combat knife that had seen him through countless trials. Around him, the other competitors, a mixture of alien species, stood stoically. They were all silent, waiting for the storm. Some seemed indifferent, confident in their survival abilities, while others fidgeted nervously. But they all shared the same thought: the storm was coming. And it wouldn't be merciful. Alex had seen the look in their eyes. They were all playing the same game, the one where survival wasn't guaranteed, where only the strongest and the smartest could survive. But they didn't know what he knew. They didn't know the fire that burned in his chest. They didn't know how much humanity had already been underestimated across the galaxy. They didn't know what it meant to push beyond the limits when everything inside you screamed to stop. He could already hear the distant howls of the sandstorm, a violent growl from the planet's depths. It was coming, fast. The Syndicate had long used Xylok 9 as a proving ground, a brutal gauntlet where every species tried and failed to endure the planet's unyielding weather. No one had ever survived the storm's full intensity. No one, except, perhaps, for the humans. A voice crackled through the speakers overhead. It was cold, distant, the voice of Commander Taurak, the high-ranking officer of the Syndicate. His tone oozed contempt as it boomed over the comms. Prepare yourselves. The Sandstorm Test will begin in 5 minutes. You will be judged on your ability to withstand the fury of Xylok 9. Failure is not an option. Alex's jaw tightened. Failure? The word echoed in his mind, a personal challenge. There was no room for failure. Not here. Not in this fight. He scanned the faces of the other competitors, noting their shifts in posture, the way their eyes darted nervously from side to side. The aliens who had come to test their strength against the storm all seemed to have one thing in common: they underestimated the human spirit. The countdown continued. 3 minutes. 2. 1. The wind began to pick up, howling across the desert in a shrill, unrelenting cry. The first wave of sand hit, swirling in a massive wall of grit and dust. Alex stood firm, every muscle in his body coiled, ready for action. The others around him stumbled back, seeking shelter or running toward their predetermined safe zones. But Alex didn't move. He knew that running was a fool's game. The storm wouldn't relent. It would follow, hunt, and destroy. He had been given one chance, one test, to prove that humanity could endure where all other species failed. But unlike the others, he had something they didn't: the will to fight. With a quick glance to his right, Alex saw a massive cactus standing in isolation, its great arms twisted into an unnatural shape, towering above the dunes. A life form unique to this planet, capable of surviving the harshest conditions by storing water in its vast, spiny body. It was the only shelter in sight. Without hesitation, Alex sprinted toward it, the wind lashing against him like 1,000 needles. Each step felt like a battle, his breath ragged, his eyes stinging from the sand that whipped across his face. He stumbled but caught himself, pushing through the pain. Survival wasn't a matter of ease, it was about enduring. The cactus loomed ahead, and Alex reached it just as the storm hit in full force. He dove inside its hollow trunk, the inside surprisingly cool and firm. It was a tight fit, but Alex managed to wedge himself into the narrow opening. The world outside had become a furious roar, the sand ripping across the landscape like an angry beast. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The silence after the storm's chaos felt almost peaceful. Alex took a deep breath, letting the cool air settle into his lungs. He had made it to safety, But that was only the first step. The storm would pass, but the real test was about to begin. He crouched against the inner wall, his mind racing through strategies. He had been trained for this moment, but nothing in his past could prepare him for what was about to come. The storm wasn't just an external threat, it was a test of mind and body. Endurance would only take him so far. He needed more. He needed to outthink the storm. Time passed slowly. Hours? Days? He didn't know. The storm's roar never ceased, an unrelenting reminder of what was happening outside. He couldn't let himself grow complacent. Every part of him screamed for rest, for sleep, but he knew he couldn't afford it. The storm would pass, but only if he could hold on. Then, the transmission cut through the silence. Commander Taurak's voice, filled with disbelief, echoed through the comms. "This is impossible. He's still alive." Alex's lips curled into a small, grim smile. The Syndicate had expected him to fall just like the others. But he wasn't like the others. He would prove them wrong. The thought pushed him forward, past the limits of exhaustion. If humanity was to be recognized, it would be on his terms, not theirs. From within the cactus, Alex listened as the storm slowly began to die down, the howling wind fading into a distant murmur. But the real battle had only just begun. The storm was a living thing, an elemental force that refused to be tamed. From inside the cactus, Alex could hear its fury as it battered the desert outside, the wind howling like an ancient beast, clawing at the world. The shelter provided by the cactus was minimal, but it was enough. For now. The initial rush of adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a deep, gnawing exhaustion. Alex pressed his back against the cold, spiny walls of the cactus, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He needed rest, but his mind refused to let him drift. Every muscle in his body screamed for respite, yet he couldn't afford it. Not when there was so much at stake. The storm's violence outside was unlike anything he had experienced before. It wasn't just the wind, though that alone could strip flesh from bone. It was the sand, a ceaseless barrage of gritty particles that could blind, choke, and disorient anyone unlucky enough to be caught in its path. Alex had learned about it in simulations, but no one could truly prepare for the sheer force of nature that was the Xylok 9 sandstorm. He glanced over his shoulder at the small ration pack stowed in his bag. Food was the least of his concerns, water was the priority. He had a limited supply, but it wasn't enough to last for long. The desert was unforgiving, and even a single mistake could turn fatal. As the minutes turned into hours, Alex forced himself to remain vigilant, his ears straining for any sounds beyond the storm's roar. The sky outside had turned a dull, oppressive yellow, and the constant vibration of the wind against the cactus seemed to reverberate deep into his bones. It was as if the planet itself were alive, trying to swallow him whole. The silence inside the cactus was both a comfort and a curse. It gave him space to think, to reflect on everything that had brought him to this point. The reason he was here, the reason humanity was here, was about more than just survival. This was a test of principle. A test of worth. The Syndicate of Survivors had run this gauntlet for centuries, using it to weed out the weak and celebrate the strong. And the strongest were often those who were willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to survive. I'm not going to be a footnote, Alex thought, his jaw tightening. I'm not going to fail. The comms crackled to life, a voice cutting through the static. It was Taurak, his sneering tone coming through clearer than before. "Surprised to hear you're still alive, O'Connell. I must admit, you've shown more resilience than I expected. But let's see how long that lasts." The voice was a cruel reminder of what was at stake. Taurak's disbelief was palpable, like a challenge Alex couldn't ignore. The commander, along with the Syndicate, had made it clear that humanity was nothing but a curiosity, a species unworthy of the stars. They had used Xylok 9 to humiliate and crush every human who came before him. But Alex wouldn't allow that to happen. Not again. He clenched his fists, the resolve building like fire in his chest. The storm outside was a living nightmare, but he would endure it. The wind howled louder, pushing against the walls of his temporary refuge. Sand leaked through the cracks, its fine grains working their way inside, stinging his exposed skin. Every breath he took was filled with grit. The clock in his mind ticked relentlessly. Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last. His body felt as though it were on the verge of collapse. His vision blurred as the effects of dehydration started to take hold, his throat dry and his lips cracked. But Alex knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for a second. The cactus, which had once seemed like an impenetrable shield, now felt like a tomb. The storm outside was relentless, and the sand gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, pulling him toward the brink of madness. There was no telling how long he could stay in here. The storm was unpredictable, and its intensity could increase at any moment. A sudden, sharp noise outside made him freeze. It wasn't the storm. It was something else. Something, or someone, moving across the sand. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. The competitors in the Sandstorm Test weren't just battling nature, they were competing against one another. The Syndicate had always played a twisted game, watching their subjects suffer, sometimes even turning them against each other for sport. Alex's pulse quickened. He hadn't been told anything about other threats in the test, but it didn't surprise him. If the Syndicate had orchestrated this test, they would find ways to make it even more dangerous. The other competitors might already be dead, or worse, they might still be alive, hunting him. The cactus creaked under the force of the storm's fury, but Alex didn't hesitate. His hand moved instinctively to the knife at his side. He had no intention of being caught off guard. The desert had already tried to kill him once. It wouldn't get a second chance. He held his breath, listening. For a moment, everything went quiet. The storm had momentarily lulled, as if holding its breath alongside him. Then, the sound came again, closer this time. There was definitely something, or someone, out there. Taurak, Alex muttered under his breath, knowing the commander was no doubt watching from his observation post, enjoying every moment of his suffering. This is where it ends. With a deep breath, Alex began to make his way out of the cactus, every movement deliberate, every instinct focused. The sandstorm was still swirling in chaotic, unpredictable gusts, but it had weakened just enough to give him a sliver of hope. The terrain outside was hostile, yes, but Alex wasn't going to let that stop him. He knew the storm would give him one final chance, just enough to move. And if he could make it out of this alive, Taurak would finally see the truth. Humanity wasn't just a force to be reckoned with, it was a force that would change the galaxy, no matter what anyone thought. With a last glance at the hollow cactus, Alex stepped into the storm, his heart pounding, his eyes locked on the horizon. The real test was about to begin. Alex's first step into the storm felt like stepping into another world. The wind lashed against his face, carrying with it grains of sand sharp enough to cut. His muscles screamed for respite, but he couldn't afford it. The storm had already taken so much from him, the relentless pounding of the wind, the suffocating weight of the sand, yet somehow, against all odds, he had survived. But now, the real challenge was just beginning. His breath came in shallow gasps as the wind roared around him. He squinted through the stinging sand, trying to find any sign of the cactus, his temporary refuge. But it was gone, swallowed by the storm's fury. There was only the endless expanse of sand, shifting and changing with each gust of wind, as if the desert itself were alive, bent on erasing every trace of his existence. Keep moving, he thought, the mantra repeating in his mind like a lifeline. Stay focused. You're not done yet. He pulled his hood tighter around his face, securing the cloth over his mouth and nose to keep the sand out. He had limited water, only enough for a few hours, but it wouldn't last long if he didn't find shelter. The storm had already begun to reclaim the ground he had just crossed, and it wouldn't be long before he would be buried in its wake. A faint glow appeared on the horizon, faint but undeniable. It was an oasis of light, something he could latch onto in the darkness of the storm. His heart quickened as he recognized the shape of a structure emerging from the sand, an abandoned military bunker, perhaps, or a fortified outpost. Whatever it was his best chance at surviving the next few hours. He pushed forward, each step a battle, each breath harder to catch. His limbs felt like lead, his vision blurred from exhaustion and the sting of the sand. But the light on the horizon grew brighter with every step. The structure was closer now, a beacon in the storm, and Alex could almost taste the safety that awaited him. But there was something else, something he had not anticipated. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement, large, dark shapes against the storm, looming like predators in the shadows. His pulse spiked. Deathworlders. The monsters that live for the thrill of the hunt. The Syndicate must have sent them to make sure no one left this storm alive. Alex's heart skipped a beat. He knew what he had to do, he had to keep moving, keep running toward the shelter. But the creatures were closing in. There was no way they hadn't seen him by now. They were fast, ruthless, and relentless. He cursed under his breath, his instincts kicking into overdrive. He would have to outsmart them. The Deathworlders were formidable, but Alex had learned long ago that the most dangerous weapon wasn't always strength, it was cunning. And he was not about to die in the middle of the Xylok 9 desert. With a deep breath, Alex shifted course, ducking low and moving swiftly behind the nearest dune. The creatures had slowed down, clearly tracking his every move. Alex's hand went to the knife at his belt, and he gripped it tightly, preparing for a fight that he didn't want but knew was inevitable. The wind howled, and the creature's guttural growls grew louder, filling the space with a low, menacing rumble. His pulse hammered in his chest as he crouched behind the dune, taking quick, shallow breaths. His mind raced, running through every possible scenario, every contingency plan he had learned in the Special Forces. The Deathworlders were powerful, but their brute strength could be countered by intelligence and preparation. Focus, Alex thought, his breath steadying. You don't need to fight them head-on. You just need to survive. The creatures were almost upon him now, their forms massive and grotesque against the storm. Alex had only moments to act. He scanned the ground around him, looking for any advantage he could use. There, a pile of broken debris, half buried in the sand. If he could get to it, he might be able to create a diversion, something to throw them off his scent long enough to slip away. He waited until the last possible second, until the Deathworlders were nearly on top of him. Then, with a burst of energy, Alex sprinted toward the debris, kicking up sand as he moved. The Deathworlders reacted instantly, their massive forms charging after him, their claws scraping the ground like an ominous countdown. Just as one of the creatures lunged at him, Alex dove behind the debris. He grabbed a jagged piece of metal and hurled it as hard as he could into the distance. The noise, sharp and metallic, echoed through the storm, drawing the Deathworlders' attention for a split second. It was enough. In that brief moment of confusion, Alex bolted, sprinting toward the shelter, his legs moving faster than they ever had before. He could hear the Deathworlders growling behind him, but he didn't dare look back. His focus was singular: get to the shelter. The wind screamed in his ears as he ran, the world blurring around him. He felt his muscles burning, his body reaching its limits. But he wasn't done yet. Not while there was a chance to survive. Not while there was still a sliver of hope. The shelter loomed ahead, its outline stark against the storm. The door was slightly ajar, a glimmer of sanctuary in the chaos. Alex pushed himself harder, his every step a defiance of the storm and the creatures chasing him. He could taste the bitter sting of victory just beyond reach. With a final, desperate sprint, Alex reached the door and slammed it shut behind him. The sound of the wind, the growls of the Deathworlders, and the chaos outside faded as the door sealed tight, leaving him in the cold silence of the bunker. Alex leaned against the door, panting heavily, his body trembling from exhaustion. He closed his eyes, letting the adrenaline fade as he took a deep breath. He had made it. He had survived. But the war was far from over. Talrak would be watching, and the Syndicate would have no mercy. Alex knew one thing for certain: he was not done fighting. The storm had been just the beginning. And humanity's story had only just begun.